Hey guys, what's going on? This is Brad from the Ed Army, and today we have an off-the-cuff video focusing on two topics. First being the large amount of Yu-Gi-Oh product coming out right now, and is it too much too soon, as well as quality control. And we also have why we're going to need an impending ban list sooner than later. So before any of that, like, comment, subscribe, put on those headphones, and enjoy the ride for Off the Cuff. Now, getting into the topic, let's start with why there's so much product right now and why that actually might be a bad thing. Here's the thing. Yu-Gi-Oh product as a whole, when it's good, that's a great thing because you know you're getting some investment back in when you're buying it. Now, another issue is when there's too much good Yu-Gi-Oh product and you can't really buy it all because there is just way too much stuff floating around. And this is one of those situations where we have way too much good product flowing around, and Konami has released it in such a quick and rapid succession that the community itself won't be able to keep up as much as they'd like. Starting off with the first set that I'd like to talk about, we have to look at Age of Overlord, an amazing meta-impactful set, and it's very expensive for a lot of these engines, but also defining. Now let's move into the next set, being Rarity Collection. Also a fantastic set, massive reprints, making a lot of staples budget friendly, and also adding to the pool of available cards. Now, we have another set coming out, believe it or not, being Valiant Smashers, going to introduce only about one really meta impactful set, but the other decks will have support in the future, and that's going to be really interesting, a new deck building pack. And then finally, we have the Fire King structure deck, which is going to finally introduce the Fire King strategy, the new cards to the TCG, so we'll have it all available. Now, hearing all that, you'd probably ask me, where's the problem there? Well, here's the thing. Age of Overlord, here for about a week and a half to 2 weeks before the Rarity Collection. Okay, what's the other issue? Valiant Smashers, about 2 weeks after the Rarity Collection, is about to be here. Okay. Well, what about the Fire King structure deck? It's going to be here in about a month. Okay, so 4 really decent products in a span of time. How could that be a bad thing? Well, here's the problem. Of those 3 sets in the fourth in the structure deck, we have them in a couple of months span, not allowing people to generate enough money to buy the products. Options are never a bad thing, but in the case of Yu-Gi-Oh for this situation, there's a big problem when you are unable to keep up with ever-changing and ever-coming-out demands. In the form of all the Yu-Gi-Oh product we've received, the biggest problem is how are we able to keep up with buying stuff if we have to keep pouring money into one set after another and not being able to keep up. Now, not everyone will play Centurion, so understandably, that is not necessarily a case where people are going to dive into the set. But the point is, say you wanted to play Centurion, however, you wanted to pick up cards from Age of Overlord and you wanted to pick up cards from the Rarity Collection. You're looking at an excess of a couple of $100 to maybe even $500, depending on what you want to pick up and how you're supposed to do it. Not even including the fact that once we're out of December and in January, we'll have another set in the form of Maze of Millennia waiting around the corner for you to pick up because there are necessary cards in the deck to boost the power of something like Centurion. Now, it's a pretty interesting situation with what's going on because, it's never a bad thing, as I said before, but we're in a situation where it's not bad, but there's a limitation to what the community can do as a whole and players as a whole can do. Now, to get around this issue, I think a few things should have been probably taken into consideration. Now, Konami probably could have pushed one of these sets further back in order to give a little bit more breathing room, because without a ban list, I don't really see releasing this side set so early, as I can't really understand releasing something like Valiant Smashers in this year, as it doesn't really serve a purpose because it won't really be able to see any meta impact due to the fact that one of the best generic search cards for the strategy in Bonfire won't be available until January in Maze of Millennia, but also the fact that it's going into a format where a lot of strategies that hadn't faced in the OCG are still here and kicking in the form of something like Kashtira or even, not as far nerfed tier elements. So effectively, we're in a situation where we have to decide where is our game going to go, but also how can we manage it as a whole. And in the case of these products, I do think that some consideration should have been taken in to reorganize them in a better position. Something like the 2-player starter deck really should have taken the place of the Fire King structure deck, because I do think the Fire King structure deck, although coming out this year in 2023, would have been way better in 2024, solely based on the fact that it would have had access to Bonfire immediately once it's released, and this would make the strategy more playable, as it will have to, unfortunately, be unplayable for a little bit. Now, moving into another issue that we are having, and one that I personally don't like, is the issue of quality of our Yu-Gi-Oh products. And here's the thing: of the sets we've had this year, some have been pretty okay, some have been like bangers, but there are some that just fell shortly on their sword. And something like Duelist Nexus is a prime example, as the set's actually not really that bad. It's actually pretty fantastic, but because of the overall price of cards and not being actually too meta impactful at the start until, a lot of decks had to show themselves, it basically became a set that ended up doing way better than it was given credit for, and it's probably more useful than it appears. Now, there are some things that are duds in the set. We can't, unfortunately, change those, but hey, you live and learn. Now, in the case of some of the other sets, I do think the issue is the quality is really bad. And I don't think that the sets were meant or intentionally designed to be terrible, but I do think certain sets do need buffs, or they need to be able to be, immediately either viable or, competitively useful. This is one of those things where, unfortunately, I can't just say, oh, well, they could have made what's a good example? They could have made Volcanics a tier 1 strategy. No, they didn't have to do it, but what they needed to do is make it available and more playable for the modern day. Now, did they do it? Technically, yes. But is it actually as good as it could be? No, of course not. This is more so from the fact that we have issues of the decks being outperformed by whatever the meta would be at the time. And unfortunately for all the decks in the Fire Legendary Duelist, the reason they tanked, in my opinion, was that we did need a ban list right before they came out to at least give the decks a chance to shine and maybe people the confidence to try them out. As I do think if there was a ban list prior to the Fire Legendary Duelist, we could have stood a chance at seeing a lot of these strategies at least make appearances at different regionals and stuff like that, because maybe people would have been inspired to give them a shot. And in the case of the Fire Legendary Duelist, quality is not necessarily a bad thing there, but the quantity is the issue, as a lot of this set won't move. Now, believe it or not, this set is actually pretty good, as the support release for all 3 of the strategies are fantastic. When I looked at all of the support for every archetype and kind of got a grasp for each of them, I think all of them are actually playable. They were made to be arguably their own things, and they actually work a bit well. However, each of them, for the most part, still needs something. However, unlike the quality of Salamangreat, Battling Boxer and Volcanic have been given the short stick. As personally, of looking at all of them, the only one that could be almost ready to be playable again, besides Salamangreat, would have to be Battling Boxer, as rank 4 spam is still available, but also its strategy has actually become more clear-cut, as it's supposed to build negates as well as being able to do out damage. And they just need a little bit more support, and they can actually start to play. With Volcanics, their biggest issue isn't actually that they aren't playable. It's more of their support isn't linear enough to go generic, as once Bonfire comes out, that will fix some of the issues the deck has, is surgeability for some of their starting cards, and also being able to perform an FTK if so they choose. So effectively, all those strategies are available, but how much is a Legendary Duelist box for the Soulburner one? And believe it or not, they're still sitting about under $30. And this is actually pretty logical and sad, because this set is actually very good. It's very much so more powerful, in my opinion, than the Water Legendary Duelist, and that one had Forbidden Droplets in it. However, this is the issue that we're having with a lot of these Legendary Duelists, is that either they're really, really good, but they're not good against the meta, so they give the buff to support to their archetypes, but they suck, or they're really, really bad, and no one wants to open them anyways because they're just a hunk of junk. Now, my thing is this. I don't think Konami is going to try to print absolutely meta busting support for all of these decks and or strategies because, that's just not a good practice all the time. But they have to understand that a lot of the product has to be better for power creep, as if you can at least add some power to some of these decks to deal with some of the issues with the power creep that the game is in at the moment, then maybe they can at least be playable on a rogue level. But sadly, we're at that point where you should be making support to be effectively a rogue deck to even at least be okay, and that kind of sucks. Because I don't think that that's all good practice, because that basically means every deck has to get buffed so much to where it can stand on its own two legs and actually swing at the meta that it probably hasn't been able to compete with ever since its creation. And effectively, that's just, kind of sucks. But there we are with that type of situation with the quality of the product, where we have really, really good sets and they're bangers over and over again. But then sometimes we get these duds that just keep on flip-flopping. And unfortunately, like I said, the only ones who lose out are local stores because big box stores could just sell blisters and people will eventually buy them out. However, when it comes to a local store, would you rather buy a box of anything in terms of the form of the Legendary Duelist, or would you just rather not buy it at all and save your money? And yeah, money wins out all the time. And sadly, that's just where we're at with the product. Now, moving into the ban list discussion, here's the thing. I'm not a big fan of having ban lists in terms of having these discussions because, yes, it is free content, but personally, it's kind of more played out and hoping that we get what we want instead of Konami doing what they will. And yeah, I could talk about it in over length, which I will to a degree, but I'm going to focus more on why we'll need it instead of actually having it talking about its contents. My reasoning is this. With all the product we're getting and all the new strategies we're technically getting or revamped strategies we're getting, there's no way a lot of them are going to be able to compete in the metagame, even with how diverse it is right now. Now, do I think we need to eliminate certain decks off the table? No, but I do think we need to find a way to limit the power of certain decks in order to maybe allow these new decks to make their way into the metagame. Now, it depends on how people feel about something like this in terms of, do you want a super diverse format, even more diverse than what we have now, or would you prefer to have a less diverse format with fewer decks, but also allow a majority of decks to be unplayable, including new ones? Also, in advance, guys, sorry for if you hear me kind of stopping a bit. I've been dealing with a cold, so I've been coughing a lot, and I don't want to have too many coughs on record, so, trying to avoid it. But, back to the ban list thing. It's one of these things where I don't hate every deck in the format, because I've actually been watching a lot of the recent YCSs and just random duel videos, and I like it. I think it's not too overbearing to where people can't play. However, I do see the problems going on because, yeah, I do think as I wouldn't say a former competitive, but as a casual player who can play competitively, I can see the big problems going on, which is you can't side deck for everything. So a lot of decks can wash other decks in post game one situations if they choose to go first, because the decks that they're facing may not have anything for them. So we see this sometimes with, I think the last YCS, a lot of people were probably siding for Rescue Ace. However, we saw Unchained winning in YCS Richmond, which was easily able to maybe take advantage of people siding heavily for that matchup against Rescue Ace, as a lot of the cards that are good against Rescue Ace don't necessarily equal a victory against Unchained. Now, personally, I think Unchained is actually a very balanced strategy that just got really powered up because of its support, and I actually love to see that. I'm not opposed to it, and I think that's just really great. But I do see the problem with, Yu-Gi-Oh! Being unable to keep up with it in terms of most decks not being able to beat Unchained, but I actually don't think that's the case. I just think Unchained is designed really well to deal with a lot of interactions. It's consistent, not too broken, and just deals with it as best as it can. Now, in the case of the other strategies, what would actually need to happen to re-level the playing field for something like Centurion or even something like Fire Kings to be somewhat playable once we receive them. Now, unfortunately for Fire Kings and Centurion, I think they're probably going to wait a little bit longer to be a bit more viable unless they're going to be, at least for Centurion, the Calamities build where they're just going straight for Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity. So that could obviously be like its go-to for now. But in the case of both of them being a bit more playable, we'll probably have to wait till January when we receive the Maze Millennia set to give them Bonfire in order to get them going. Now, of those strategies, a Banlist would probably be the best option to give them powered up. But the problem is, what type of Banlist are we going to receive in that case? Because I do see the issue being, well, if we do have a ban list, how could it make make the format more healthy? Or is it just going to be a slate ban list where Konami wants to push people into new products? Because that happens all the time. And sadly, although some people hate them, I understand why they happen. So, hey, it's unfortunately just, I would say like a pitfall of the game where people have to be pushed on to new things. In the case of some of the strategies that we do have and don't have, I do see certain decks probably being touched on the ban list just to push them down, because a lot of them are still, I would say, a lot of these decks that have been almost 2 or 3 years at this point are still like punching up at other decks or punching, down at them. So in order to effectively make room for these new strategies or to make room for more diversity to allow other decks to come in, they would probably have to slap a lot of these decks that have been around for a while in order to give them the chance to effectively, take those spots. This probably meaning, I wouldn't say the demise, but serious hits to certain these decks. The first one I could see easily taking a massive hit is actually going to be the branded deck, probably losing Branded Fusion to 1, and maybe even Branding Opening or even a Looper going to 1 at some point, just to severely limit their ability to use their fusion spell, which has basically been arguably the only part of the deck that we usually see consistently, which is just Branded Fusion going over and over again. And fortunately, although I don't hate the deck because my friend played Branded and I really like the deck personally, I do see why they probably want to limit its power and then basically force you to rely more on using something like the Chimera cards to try to back it up. So I could see that happening as like a touch. For some of the other decks, for tier, unfortunately, the best way I would see to limit them here in the TCG would be just banning Kelbeck and Yugioh. Getting rid of them just facilitates the deck, and it would make the deck really weak, but also it would just make it at least playable, but I don't know how it would function. People would probably find ways to make it work. Maybe, I don't know, maybe play Lightsworn cards or something to mill now. The point is, that would be the best way to hit that deck because you would just take away what gives it its power, because it would have to rely on its own engine, and now like that non-additional mill 5 is just going to be gone. So it would give breathing room to other strategies, because some decks really hate to get their cards milled out of their deck, and it would force the tier players to adapt a new form of the tier elements deck, but not completely getting rid of the strategy altogether. Now, for Kashtira, unfortunately, the only hit I could really think, if Konami doesn't want to just like slaughter the deck completely, would be, maybe a limit to Fenrir, and maybe I would say a limit to Unicorn, because if you do 2 limits on both of those cards, you now turn the deck into almost a less powerful engine of itself, basically forcing it to be playable, but not to be as consistent as it can be. So effectively, if you get the your pressured planet Rysoth, you have to use it to get either Unicorn, or you have to go for your 1 Fenrir, because you need both. And or if you draw it, you're basically forced to grab Ogre or Riseheart, and most people aren't going to play multiple Risehearts in terms of like maybe more than 2. So that would officially affect that deck from essentially running around as much as it is, and it's still playable. It's not weaker than it should be. It's just not as powerful as it once was. So, you can just take it as a grain of salt. But that's the way I would deal with that. Now, for something like Labyrinth that has been existing for a while, pretty much I would just take away Eradicator from the deck. I actually think the deck is relatively fair depending on what you decide to leave it with. But if you get rid of Eradicator, I think you deal with the most unfair card in the deck. So it leaves it still playable to do what it does. And effectively, you have to leave it to die roll or change. I think that's one of the issues that the deck suffers from more than anything else, is that you have to rely on drawing your furniture cards if you're playing the furniture build. As the furniture build, although being powerful, letting them, or letting Labyrinth utilize its traps early in the first turn, it's not necessarily the most consistent thing all the time. The deck is very powerful, but hey, you don't always get it off, and sometimes you just get stuck having to set 5 and hope that they can't deal with that. So I think that's pretty fair for a trap deck. It can be more powerful than like a normal deck because it does have to rely on setting cards. So, just leave it where that is. For something like Unchained, I don't really think the deck needs a hit onto its actual core. Where I think they probably can limit or hit it would probably be in something like the DDD monster. I don't really think it should be banned because Caesar's kind of like a part of their main board, but it's not really the most, I would say the most ridiculous card you need. As I don't think they shouldn't have it, because I don't think that would be a little bit unfair to just slap that card because of the deck and also limit its potential in the actual strategy. I do see someone maybe saying, "Oh, Abomination's Prison to 1," and although I could see that happening, I would personally not like that because I think that's a really big hit consistency to an Unchained player. But hey, that's just one of the options. For some of the other decks that are running around, I don't really see any major hit going on that would actually turn them down too much. Some of the generic cards that probably could be hit, I do see something like, unfortunately, Pot of Prosperity being a card in the future that'll be hit, but not right now. And my reasoning is obviously going to be the card's just way too good. I don't hate the card in any capacity. I think people should be able to play 3 of them while it's available, but I do see the problem with that card. It's basically just a better Pot of Prosperity a Pot of Duality in my opinion, because you can special summon, you get half damaged, but if you're going first, who cares? And more importantly, if you're going second, you might be digging for something you need, so that leaves it up in the air to be arguably more useful. So, that's just how I see that. And maybe, I don't know, maybe they could bring something off the ban list. Personally, a card I think that needs to come off the ban list right now, at least to make a deck more viable, would be Trident. I don't really think Trident's going to be too oppressive. And even the last time it got banned, it didn't really deserve its banning here in the TCG. I think they hit Trident for the wrong reasons, because I do know they wanted to limit Tri-Brigade's power, but honestly, if they got rid of Barrage, it made Trident so much weaker, because Barrage was like the enabler to get the monster you needed for Trident. Otherwise, in Tri, you weren't always normal summoning a Zodiac monster to utilize it as a Trident pop. So by getting rid of Barrage, you would basically force people to have to try to find additional ways to get the Zodiac monsters on board. So yeah, that's just my rant. I was a Tri-Brigade player, so I knew when that happened. I was like, that wasn't the right hit, but hey, why not? And point aside, that's all I have for the a ban list discussion, I guess, as well as why we would need one sooner than later. It's basically just to allow these products to come in and play right now, because we have a super diverse format, but that's not necessarily a good thing if you want people to pick up new strategies to play, because there's no guarantee that they'll actually play well in a very diverse format because they can't work against specific strategies. Now, as a little bit of things to talk about, just to finish off this video, I just want to say thank you guys so much. I just hit 60 subs, plus I think I'm at 61 or 62 on my channel right now, and I just want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for those people who are watching. And if you made it this far, remember to pat yourself on the back, because I appreciate it so much, and I appreciate you if you enjoy this stuff. So in order to wrap up everything, I just want to talk about one of the more important things that I find about Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole and as a cycle. So if this is your first time, this is something that you might want to hear out. So if this is your first time having one of these big Yu-Gi-Oh! Cycles, you're probably wondering what's going to happen. Here's the thing. There's no guarantee that there's going to be an impending ban list of Doom or anything like that. Heck, there's no guarantee that we're going to actually leave any of these cards from this format for a good couple of months, even into next year. My point of telling you guys this is that if you're trying to wonder what's the right thing that's going to do for you, I will always say follow your money, follow your heart, and figure it out. Because ultimately, it's your choice in your life, and you have to decide what's best for you. When it comes to metagame brain and being, a Yu-Gi-Oh player brain, right? You don't want to blow too much of your money because you got to take care of yourself. And if you're not taking care of yourself, then you're struggling to figure it out. And you don't want to put that on yourself. You should be able to play the game, have as much fun as you want, and also be able to utilize yourself in the best possible way. Now, for something like what's going on right now, in terms of the world being able to afford cards, I'm going to be doing my best to make sure the budget series stay up to date and try to keep you guys in. As one thing I'm going to be doing very soon is these 5 decks for the beginners, but also if you want to enjoy these strategies as well, there's going to be something for you. And you're going to have to effectively be ready to read them in terms of like seeing the strategies and kind of adapt them. Because there's a lot of decks I think that are flying under the radar that with the format that we have right now, unless we have an impending ban list immediately, these decks are actually going to be playable, and I can't wait to show them to you guys. So we have that. And effectively, that's all I've got today, guys. So if you like this video, as always, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, this is an off-the-cuff video, which focuses more on just an open discussion about topics, because I'd rather talk about it in an open format than having me kind of like structure it down too much because I could miss something. But also, it's to give you guys something more to listen to, as you can listen to this as a podcast. See, I snuck a cough in here anyways. But yeah, point aside, Giving Week is next week. So this video will have maybe one more video with it before next week has 7 videos. Each day will have 1. And I can't wait to do it, as Giving Week is going to be my way to give back to you guys who have been a part of it, as we're still on the race to 100 subs. And for all of you who have stuck it out here since the beginning, that you guys are important to me, and those who are coming on will be important to me. So thank you guys so much. And as always, this is Brad from the Ad Army signing off. And for all of you out there to sign on.